Welcome to the Library of Alexandra, where we explore strange books and powerful ideas without pretending that reading them is always easy. Because let's be honest, we all want to be the kind of person who reads every night, annotates beautifully, and understands philosophy on the first try. But life gets busy. So that's what this is. A space where we break down big, complicated books into something digestible, meaningful, and actually enjoyable. If that sounds like your kind of library, make sure you like and subscribe. And before you go, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I love seeing how far these ideas travel. And finally, send this video to someone who keeps saying, I should really read more. This is their sign.
Suffering is inevitable, but not necessary.
Wow. Yeah, just let that sink in for a second.
Right. Just pause wherever you are right now. Suffering is inevitable, but not necessary.
On the surface, it feels like a total contradiction.
It really does. That quote comes from Dr. Thomas Hora. He was a psychiatrist, but his practice was uniquely infused with these deep spiritual teachings.
And that specific phrase, that friction between the reality of pain and our reaction to it, that's the engine driving everything we're going to explore today.
Exactly. So I want you, the listener, to think about your own immediate reflexes for a second.
Like, what do you do the very millisecond that emotional or physical pain creeps into your day?
Right. Do you reach for a pint of Ben & Jerry's?
Cherry Arcia, maybe?
Always Cherry Garcia. Or maybe you don't use food at all. Maybe you just bury yourself in your work. You stay at the office until midnight, grinding away so you don't have to go home and sit in silence.
Or you frantically seek out medical buffers for every minor ache.
Yeah. Or you obsess over accumulating wealth.
Yeah.
There's this pervasive modern idea that if you just stockpile enough money, you can build a fortress to keep the pain out entirely.
We all have our preferred escape routes, right?
We absolutely do. And the source text we are diving into today takes a really fascinating approach to those escape routes.
It doesn't judge them?
Not at all. It doesn't wag a finger at you for eating the ice cream or working late. It just methodically points out how futile they are.
Today we have this stack of excerpts from a truly remarkable book. It's titled The Way of Suffering, Readings for an Enlightened Life.
Edited by Michael Leach, James T. Keane, and Doris Goodnough.
And we want to be entirely transparent right at the top of this deep dive about our mission here. We are going to wade into the raw, unvarnished reality of human pain.
We are talking horrific accidents, devastating illnesses, and just moments of absolute bottomless despair.
But, and this is where the mission really pivots, the goal is absolutely not to drag you down or leave you feeling depressed.
The exact opposite, actually. We are doing this deep dive to uncover how fundamentally changing your relationship to suffering might actually be the ultimate shortcut to profound personal growth.
To empathy.
Yeah. And, as lofty as it sounds, to a state of enlightenment.
The text presents this incredibly challenging idea. We spend so much of our finite life energy fighting the reality of pain. We scream for a miracle, we beg for it to go away, we numb ourselves.
And in all that frantic fighting, we completely miss the transformative power hidden inside the suffering itself.
Right. Now, to really wrap our heads around how this book approaches such a heavy topic, the editors use this wonderfully quirky analogy right in the introduction.
Oh, the Star Wars one. I love this. It frames the whole discussion perfectly.
It really does. So, The Way of Suffering is actually the fourth book in a series published by Orbis Books.
And the first three books covered gratitude, kindness, and forgiveness.
Right. So logically, you'd think a book on suffering would be the massive downer at the end of the series. Like, you've read about all the good stuff, and now here comes the heavy medicine.
But the editors argue this is a lot like the Star Wars franchise.
Exactly. Because Star Wars, A New Hope, was technically the fourth movie released to the public. But structurally, narratively, it's the true beginning of the story.
Yeah, the prequel, The Phantom Menace, which came out decades later, is chronologically where the universe starts.
So the editors are making a strong philosophical case that The Way of Suffering should actually be read first. It is the true starting point.
Because to genuinely understand profound gratitude or radical forgiveness, to understand the light, you have to start in our broken world.
You have to start in the trenches. You cannot truly practice deep, radical forgiveness if you haven't intimately known the sharp, devastating pain that requires you to forgive in the first place.
That makes so much sense. The introduction points out that humanity is essentially caught in this constant loop of screaming for relief from what Shakespeare called the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune.
Because we live in a dualistic world, and we should probably define that quickly, just to ground the rest of our discussion.
Yeah, go for it.
Dualism is simply the undeniable reality of opposites, good and bad. pleasure and pain, darkness and light. They aren't mistakes. They are two sides of the exact same coin.
The editor's right that you simply cannot have one side without the other. One will follow the other as surely as a black and white horror film follows a Technicolor fairy tale at a retro drive-in.
I love that imagery. And yet, we spend our entire lives trying to cheat that system.
We really try to hack the dualistic nature of reality. We use medicine, money, power, fame.
Or that pint of ice cream.
Right, to try and dull the ache of the inevitable downswings. But the relief is universally temporary.
The ice cream always runs out. The money doesn't stop the cancer diagnosis. The power doesn't cure the anxiety.
So the text brings in the wisdom of the Buddha to explain why this hacking attempt always fails.
Yeah, the Buddha observed that suffering in this world is an absolute given because it's the natural, unavoidable byproduct of our insatiable human desires.
It's our constant buzzing state of wanting this and not wanting that.
We suffer because we don't get what we want. But the cruel irony is that we also suffer when we do get what we want.
Because the new car, or the promotion, doesn't magically fulfill us the way we thought it would. Or worse, we immediately become terrified of losing the very thing we just got.
Exactly. So if running away doesn't work and hoarding resources doesn't work, what does the text suggest we actually do?
This is where it pulls from great historical spiritual figures. The Buddha's response to this cycle was to cultivate immense compassion and loving kindness, directing it inward and outward.
And then the text layers in the perspective of Jesus. Jesus showered compassion on the suffering, but he also made a fascinating, seemingly impossible promise.
He told his followers, "In this world you shall have trials and tribulations, but be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world."
And he insisted that whatever he did, they had the capacity to do as well. We really need to unpack that phrase, overcome the world.
Right, because the editors are incredibly careful to clarify what that actually means here. It is so often misunderstood.
Overcoming the world is not about magical escapism. It doesn't mean you get a free pass from physical pain or tragedy.
It means learning to rise above the psychological despair of the world while keeping your feet firmly planted on the ground in reality.
It's about realizing our true existence, our core self, is grounded in something much deeper than our temporary circumstances, which brings us to a crucial definition.
Yeah, the listener needs to keep this in mind for this entire deep dive. The text explicitly redefines the concept of God.
They state, in no uncertain terms, that God is not a magic man in a place in the sky.
Which completely dismantles the way so many people are taught to view religion. It shifts everything.
It removes the transactional nature of faith. Instead of a cosmic Santa Claus dispensing favors for good behavior and punishments for bad, the text describes God as an always, everywhere active, unconditional love.
A love in which there is no change or shifting shadow.
The remedies of the world, the wealth, the status, those are counterfeit. The text asserts that only this perfect, unconditional love can cast out the root fear of suffering.
Because this love is the very ground of our being. Think about how radical that concept is against the backdrop of our modern world.
Oh, completely. Our entire society is aggressively obsessed with quick fixes.
If you have a question, there's a search engine. Mild discomfort, there's a pill. A moment of terrifying silence in your apartment. Endless streams of content to distract you.
Our culture conditions us to view pain as a literal glitch in the system, like an error message on a screen that needs to be swiped away instantly.
But if we view pain as a glitch, we completely contradict the ancient idea that suffering is actually a fundamental path to wisdom. How much of our daily energy are we wasting trying to avoid the unavoidable?
And the exhaustion compounds the suffering exponentially. When we treat pain as an unnatural glitch, we fight it, we resent it.
We get furious that it's happening to us.
Right. And in doing so, we suffer twice. We suffer once from the physical or emotional pain, and we suffer a second time, often much worse, from our violent psychological resistance to it.
The text uses a beautiful, haunting quote from the late Leonard Cohen to illustrate the alternative to this resistance. In his song Anthem, he sings, "There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in."
It is such a visceral image.
A crack in everything. It suggests that the brokenness isn't a failure of the design. It's the required architecture for the light to enter in the first place.
If you go through life perfectly sealed up, perfectly protected behind walls of money or distraction, no light can actually reach you.
You have to be cracked open by the experience of living.
The editors use that Cohen lyric to set expectations. These readings are not quick fixes. They won't erase your pain.
They act more like a compass needle pointing toward a different kind of enlightenment.
Exactly. Guiding us to a spiritual understanding that grounds our healing even when the physical pain remains.
Now, discussing suffering theoretically, sitting around microphones, talking about dualistic worlds and cracks, letting the light in that is intellectually satisfying.
It makes sense on paper.
But when your body violently betrays you, or when your mind completely breaks down, the philosophical theories vanish.
You are left in a terrifying new reality. And the text does not shy away from this. It dives straight into first-hand accounts of sudden, devastating pain.
And the starkly different ways humans react to it.
These personal narratives ground the high-minded theological concepts in actual blood, sweat, and tears.
The first one is a short, incredibly striking account by Therese J. Borchardt.
Borchardt writes about enduring an unbearable nervous breakdown. We aren't talking about a bad week at work.
No, this is the kind of profound mental anguish and terror that is so severe, her husband had to physically rush her to Johns Hopkins Hospital.
She writes that absolute suffocating fear had completely consumed her mind, and then, walking through the hospital lobby, she saw Jesus.
And we should clarify, she didn't have a hallucination or a mystical vision.
Right. She saw a physical object, a massive 10.5-foot tall marble statue of Jesus that sits in the hospital's administration building.
It's enormous, with its arms extended outward. And carved into the base is the inscription, "Come unto me, all ye that are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest."
Borchardt describes feeling so utterly desperate, so stripped of her own strength, that she was tempted to reach out and actually touch the hem of the statue's marble robe.
She directly compares herself to the hemorrhaging woman in the Gospels, the woman who bled for 12 years, spent every penny on doctors, and finally believed that if she could just touch the fringe of Jesus's cloak, she'd be healed.
Her reaction in that lobby is profound in its simplicity. She looks up at this massive piece of stone and says, "I believe, Jesus, I believe," and she just begins to weep at his feet.
What is so vital to understand here is the immediacy of her surrender.
Yes, in the terrifying peak of a mental breakdown, when her brain is actively betraying her, she doesn't bargain.
She doesn't scream at the statue asking for an explanation of why her brain chemistry is failing.
She simply collapses into the symbol of divine compassion and yields entirely to the weariness. She stops fighting the breakdown.
That immediate, total surrender is incredibly powerful. But what makes this book so fascinating is how it juxtaposes different human experiences.
Because right after Borchardt's story, we get another narrative.
This one is drawn out, physically agonizing, highly visible, and features a completely different approach to prayer and coping.
It's an essay by Marianne J. Keane, and it is a masterclass in the messy, frustrating reality of long-term suffering.
It's the perfect counterweight to Borchardt's story. Borchardt's crisis was acute and internal. Kane's crisis is chronic, external, and socially paralyzing.
It starts like a classic coming-of-age movie. Keane is a recent high school graduate heading to the Jersey Shore for senior week.
Supposed to be the time of her life. But on day one, she makes a classic teenage mistake. She spends 12 hours laying out on the hot sand without proper protection.
She gets a truly massive, blistering sunburn.
Wakes up the next morning completely bloated, covered in blisters, nauseous from sun poisoning.
And her friends, trying to be helpful, rally around her. They start rubbing cold creams, baby oil, and Vaseline on her severe burns.
But they are teenagers. They aren't thinking about hygiene. They're all dipping their fingers into the same communal jars.
And in doing so, they inadvertently introduce massive amounts of bacteria into her open, blistering skin.
The physical details Keane provides are intentionally vivid and, frankly, deeply uncomfortable to read.
But they are necessary. The reality of the body breaking down is uncomfortable. Within 2 months, just as she's starting her freshman year of college, her face erupts into a nightmare.
She describes having 6 to 7 abnormally large, bright red welts on her face. She bluntly calls them massive, seeping pus bags.
It is horrifying. She goes to a family doctor who takes one look and actually recommends taking a scalpel and slicing into the open sores right there in the office to relieve the swelling.
But he casually admits it will leave her face permanently, heavily scarred.
She is so terrified, she runs out of the office sobbing. And then her mother steps in.
Kane's mother sounds like an absolute force of nature. She promises they will figure it out, and she gets Kane an appointment with a top dermatologist at a major teaching hospital.
But this isn't a movie montage where she gets a magical pill. This doctor prescribes a grueling treatment plan.
For 4 solid years, every single Saturday, Kane has to endure highly acidic, incredibly painful retin-A injections administered directly into these huge, discolored, open sores on her face.
4 years of painful injections into the face.
And the physical pain is only half of the ordeal. She has to try and live a normal life while looking like this.
She takes a summer job as a file clerk in the city to help pay for college. That requires commuting on the number 13 trolleys every morning.
She writes about the absolute crushing humiliation of that daily commute. She'd sit on the trolley holding wads of tissues to her cheeks because the sores would constantly ooze fluid.
She describes watching the other passengers staring at her, visibly concerned, leaning away from her, clearly terrified of catching whatever horrific infection she appeared to have.
Just put yourself in her shoes. You are 19 or 20 years old. Society tells you your worth is heavily tied to your appearance.
And your face is quite literally a source of horror and disgust to the strangers sitting next to you.
Naturally, she prayed. But her prayers looked absolutely nothing like Borcher's weeping surrender.
Keane is brilliantly honest about her spiritual life here. She describes her prayers as frantic, angry, and deeply transactional.
She engaged in what she calls prayers of petition, which were essentially demands. Please, fix my face.
When that didn't work, she moved to prayers of bargaining. God, if you just fix my face, I promise I will spend the rest of my entire life doing good works for the poor.
And when the bargaining failed, she spiraled into deep self-pity, outright accusing God of ignoring her pain while blessing everyone else.
She admits she reached a point where she just wanted to quit, lock herself in her childhood bedroom, hide under the covers, and never let anyone see her again.
But her mother steps in again.
Yeah.
And delivers what Keane later calls the best advice ever.
It is a stunning display of tough love.
Her mother looks at her and says, "This is a life choice you need to make right now. It won't be the first difficult experience for you. You can sit in your room, mope, be entirely unproductive, or you can get over yourself, go to work, make a salary for your college tuition, and pray to God for the strength to endure this cross."
Get over yourself. To a modern ear, telling a 19-year-old girl with a horrific facial infection to get over herself sounds incredibly harsh.
Almost unfeeling.
But Keane recognizes it was the exact psychological pivot she desperately needed. Her mother wasn't minimizing the pain. She was forcing Keane out of the paralyzing role of the victim.
She was telling Keane that the pain didn't exempt her from the responsibility of living her life.
And looking back years later, Keane realizes that during those 4 years on the trolley, she had fundamentally confused religion with true spirituality.
This distinction is a massive theme in the text. Keane realized the religion she was practicing at 19 was essentially operating like a cosmic vending machine.
She honestly believed she put enough spiritual currency into the slot. If she recited enough rosaries, promised enough good deeds out, would pop a miracle cure.
She thought she could literally purchase a cure with piety.
But true spirituality, she discovered, isn't about buying a way out of the fire. It's what happens to you while you are burning inside the crucible of the pain.
She writes that the intense suffering, the humiliation, slowly began to nurture within her a sincere, deep empathy toward anyone else in pain.
Once she stopped focusing entirely on her own victimhood, she started noticing the suffering of others.
It didn't matter if someone else's pain was objectively greater or lesser than hers. She understood the fundamental language of suffering now. She learned it on the number 13 trolley.
She concludes her essay saying, "Surely in 1978, God gifted me with the grace to transcend a painful experience and evolve into a more compassionate person. My pain, upon reflection, became my biggest opportunity for growth."
She never got the magical instant healing she begged for. Her face took 4 years of medical intervention to heal. But enduring the pain itself changed the architecture of her soul.
Which brings us face to face with a massive, unavoidable wall.
A wall every human hits when dealing with suffering.
Right. Keane begged for a miracle, didn't get one. Borchard found peace at the statue, but her mental illness was still a clinical reality to manage.
So if we return to the text's definition of God as an always active, unconditional love,
And if we assume this God has the power to intervene,
why doesn't God just step in and fix it?
it is the ultimate question, the one that keeps people awake at 3 a.m.
Why does an all-powerful, all-loving force permit horrific pain, childhood cancer, tsunamis, when it could end it all with a thought?
That brings us to an incredibly challenging section: the futility of asking why and the absolute danger of offering glib answers.
We're looking at a powerful essay by James Martin. He's a Jesuit priest, so he belongs to an order known for rigorous intellectualism and confronting hard questions head-on.
Martin is tackling the classic problem of evil.
The paradox. If God is entirely good, he would want to stop evil. If God is all-powerful, he could stop evil. Yet evil and profound suffering exist.
Therefore, how can God be both all good and all powerful? It's bedeviled theologians and philosophers for millennia.
When we watch a disaster on the news, or a loved one is stricken with a terminal illness, we instinctively demand to know why. We want to see the blueprints of the universe.
And James Martin is brutally, refreshingly honest here. He says the best, most truthful answer to the question, why do we suffer, is simply, we don't know.
He actually takes it a step further. He warns the reader that anyone who approaches you while you are grieving and offers you the definitive answer for why your tragedy happened is either a liar or a fool.
And more than likely is someone who has never actually faced profound, soul-crushing suffering themselves.
It is a stark warning, but psychologically, it's vital.
Martin cites two prominent Jewish scholars, Rabbi Daniel Polish and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. Both warn believers to be deeply suspicious of anyone who claims God's motives are crystal clear to them.
Rabbi Polish argues that the greatest challenge of faith isn't following rules. It's learning to live day by day with a God we cannot fully understand.
A force whose actions we attempt to explain at our own extreme peril.
Think about the real-world consequences of ignoring that warning. What happens when people try to force a neat theological explanation onto someone else's chaotic tragedy?
The text provides some gut-wrenching examples of the deep psychological damage caused by these easy answers.
Martin shares a story about his own mother visiting an elderly 90-year-old nun in a retirement home.
This nun was nearing the end of her life, in a tremendous amount of daily physical pain, and verbally expressing how much she was suffering.
Her religious superior, another nun, came into the room. Trying to offer what she thought was helpful, pious perspective, she said to the 90-year-old, "Think of Jesus on the cross."
And the 90-year-old nun, racked with chronic pain, fired right back, "Jesus was only on the cross for 3 hours."
It is a stunning reply.
It perfectly illustrates how incredibly empty and frankly insulting a religious platitude can feel when you are the person actually trapped inside the agony.
Telling someone in chronic pain to think about someone else's historical pain doesn't validate their suffering. It minimizes it.
But the text goes into a much darker, much more modern example with the story of Richard Leonard.
Richard Leonard is an Australian Jesuit priest. His life has been marked by staggering amounts of grief.
His father died of a sudden stroke at 36, leaving his mother to raise Richard, who was only 2, and his siblings.
They survived that, built a life, and then years later, on the morning of Richard's 25th birthday, the phone rings.
The call everyone dreads?
His sister Tracy, a vibrant young nurse dedicating her life to working with Aboriginal communities, had been in a catastrophic car crash.
She survived the impact, but the injuries were devastating. She was left a quadriplegic.
You can't even fathom the shockwaves that sends through a family.
Richard's mother, who had already buried her young husband, is completely shattered. She turns to her son, studying to be a priest, and asks the most raw, agonizing theological question possible. Where the hell is God?
And as Richard and his mother are trying to process the reality that Tracy will never walk or use her hands again, the mail starts arriving.
The letters start pouring in from people Richard explicitly described as some of the best Christians he knew.
But what these supposedly good people wrote in those letters was absolutely horrifying.
We need to analyze the specific contents of these letters because they reveal a profound truth about human psychology and our terror of the unknown.
Some of these well-meaning friends wrote that Tracy must have done something secret to offend God, implying her paralysis was a direct divine punishment.
Others suggested her horrific suffering was actually a glorious building block, and she was earning a literal mansion in heaven through her pain.
Still others wrote that the family shouldn't be sad, but should consider themselves blessed, because God only sends the heaviest crosses to those spiritually strong enough to bear them.
Have you, the listener, ever found yourself saying something similar to a friend whose life just fell apart?
Have you ever caught yourself defaulting to, everything happens for a reason, or God has a plan, standing at a funeral, or in a hospital waiting room?
Why do we do this? Why is our instinct to offer these neatly packaged answers to people whose lives have just been irrevocably shattered?
Psychologically speaking, we don't say those things to comfort the victim. We say them to protect ourselves.
Exactly. When we witness random, catastrophic suffering, like a healthy nurse becoming a quadriplegic in a split second because of a patch of ice, it terrifies us.
It forces us to confront our own extreme fragility. If Tracy can be paralyzed for no reason, then we can be paralyzed for no reason. Our children can be.
That thought is unbearable. So, by assigning a neat theological reason to her tragedy, saying she's being punished, earning a mansion, or being tested, the letter writers are desperately trying to reassert order and control.
They're using religious platitudes as a psychological shield.
But in their desperate attempt to protect their own worldview, they inflict massive emotional trauma on the people actually suffering.
Richard Leonard, to his immense credit, rejected every single one of those glib answers. He refused to accept a theology that turned God into a monster who breaks young women's spines to teach a lesson.
He engaged in a grueling struggle to figure out where the divine actually fits into our fragile, dangerous world.
And the breakthrough he eventually reached, the answer he gave his grieving mother, is breathtaking. He didn't tell her God caused the crash.
He said, "I think God is devastated. Like the God who groans with loss in Isaiah, and like Jesus who weeps at his best friend's tomb, God was not standing outside our pain, orchestrating it. He was a companion within it, holding us in his arms, sharing our profound grief and pain."
That is a complete paradigm shift. It moves God from the role of an architect who coldly designs our suffering to a companion who intimately endures it alongside us.
It changes the entire nature of the tragedy. It means the suffering isn't a pop quiz you have to pass. It's simply a tragedy you have to survive.
And crucially, it means you aren't surviving it alone.
But if we accept that premise, it leaves us in a very challenging spot.
Right, because if we can't answer why a tragedy happened, and if our frantic prayers for a magical fix aren't going to make the paralysis go away, what is left?
What can we actually control? If we are stuck inside the pain, where does our power reside?
This brings us to a massive pivot in the text. Section 4. Changing our relationship to pain. The editors include an incredible essay by Victor M. Perichin.
Perichin delves into the core of the Buddhist approach to suffering. It relies on the premise that when our physical reality absolutely cannot be changed, our only remaining lever of power is shifting our psychological stance toward that reality.
He illustrates this by revisiting one of the most famous Buddhist parables ever told, the story of Kisa Gotami.
It's a legendary story, but Perichin argues modern readers almost always misinterpret the ending.
Here is the setup. Kisa Gotami is a young mother, and her only child, an infant daughter, suddenly dies.
Kisa is absolutely beside herself with a grief so profound she begins descending into madness. She refuses to accept the child is dead.
She carries the body through the village, asking people for medicine to cure her baby. Finally, a wise man tells her to go see the Buddha.
She goes to the Buddha and begs him to bring her daughter back to life.
The Buddha looks at this frantic, grieving mother with immense compassion. He doesn't lecture her. He agrees to help her, but with one condition.
He tells her she must go back into the village and bring him a single mustard seed. But the catch is, the seed must come from a home that has never known sorrow, a home that has never experienced suffering or death.
Kisa is thrilled. She thinks this is incredibly easy. Mustard seeds are a staple in every kitchen.
So she runs off, full of hope, and knocks on the very first door. A family answers. She asks for a mustard seed, but adds the condition. Has there been suffering in this home?
And the family looks at her sadly and says, "Oh yes, our beloved grandfather died just last year."
Undeterred, she goes to the next house. "My son was born with a severe clubfoot."
Next house. "I lost 2 daughters in childbirth." The next. "My husband was killed in a farming accident."
Door after door, she hears nothing but tales of tragedy, loss, illness, and pain. Very quickly, the reality dawns on her.
Suffering is entirely universal. There is no magical house that has escaped the dualistic nature of the world. No human avoids loss.
She realizes she will never find the mustard seed. She gently takes her child's body to the cremation ground and returns to the Buddha empty-handed, eventually becoming a devoted follower.
Now this is where Perichin asks us to look closer. What actually changed for Kisa in that village?
The common surface-level interpretation is that her grief was eased simply because she realized misery loves company, that seeing other sad people made her feel less alone.
But Perichin argues that is a remarkably shallow reading of the text. Knowing your neighbor's husband died doesn't magically bring your own dead child back to life.
It doesn't fill the gaping physical hole in your chest.
Right. Perichin's analysis points to a fundamental shift in her internal psychology. He argues it was her relationship to her pain that completely transformed.
Before walking through the village, Kisa was clinging fiercely to the narrative that life had dealt her a uniquely unfair blow.
She believed her reality was a cosmic mistake that urgently needed to be corrected. She was victimizing herself by demanding the past be different than what it was.
Let's ground this in a modern analogy to make the mechanics of this shift clear.
Imagine driving to an incredibly important meeting, a life-changing job interview. Suddenly, there is an accident ahead, and you are stuck in a dead-stop traffic jam.
You are going to miss the interview. You have two choices.
Choice 1. Grip the steering wheel until your knuckles turn white. Scream at the windshield, pound the dashboard, curse the other drivers, and obsess over how unfair it is.
You are suffering twice. You are suffering the reality of missing the interview, and you are suffering the massive spike in your blood pressure and rage because you are fighting reality.
Choice 2 is the Kisa-Gotami realization. You look around at the hundreds of other cars stuck on the highway with you.
You realize everyone is trapped. You cannot change the fact that the road is blocked, so you take your hands off the steering wheel.
You take a deep breath. You accept the reality that you will miss the meeting. You are still profoundly disappointed. The negative outcome hasn't changed, but you drop the exhausting emotional baggage of wishing the traffic jam didn't exist.
You stop fighting reality.
And that is exactly what Kisa did. The realization of universal suffering allowed her to let go of the steering wheel.
She stopped adding that agonizing secondary layer of why me, and this shouldn't be happening, on top of her raw grief.
Her daughter was still dead. She would mourn that child forever. But the angry, desperate resistance to reality receded, which freed her mind enough to actually continue living.
To prove this isn't just an ancient fable, Perichin shares a modern, documented story. A local school system had a program sending teachers to the hospital to help chronically ill children keep up with homework.
A grammar teacher gets a routine assignment to visit a young boy. For whatever reason, the hospital staff fails to brief her on his specific condition.
She opens the door, and the boy is horribly severely burned. His face and body are heavily bandaged, and he is in excruciating physical agony.
The teacher is totally caught off guard and deeply shaken. But she's a professional, so she awkwardly stumbles her way through a lesson on nouns and verbs.
She leaves the room feeling awful, completely convinced she was useless, and that talking about grammar to a kid fighting for his life was absurd.
But the very next day, a hospital nurse tracks this teacher down and asks, "What on earth did you do with that boy?"
The medical staff had been terrified because the boy had completely given up, refusing to respond to treatment, essentially just fading away.
But immediately after the teacher's visit, his entire attitude shifted. He started fighting to recover. He decided he wanted to live.
2 weeks later, he's stable enough to explain what happened. He tells them it had nothing to do with learning about nouns.
He explained he'd been in so much pain he completely gave up hope. But then the teacher walked in, and he had a realization. He said, "They wouldn't send a teacher to work with me on grammar if I was dying, would they?"
It is a stunning, beautiful story because it perfectly isolates the variable of psychological framing.
Look at what didn't change in that hospital room. The boy was still covered in horrific third-degree burns.
Still in excruciating physical pain, still trapped in a hospital bed. His medical reality was completely identical to the day before the teacher arrived.
But his relationship to his circumstances underwent a seismic shift.
He dropped the internal narrative of inevitable death and despair and picked up the narrative of a future, of hope.
Perichin quotes the Zen master Yamada Maman here, which perfectly synthesizes this concept. Rather than give the body relief, give relief to the mind. When the mind is at peace, the body is not distressed.
A profound, undeniable truth, but, and this is a massive but, that the text thankfully addresses. We have to be realistic.
Reaching that state of Zen-like acceptance, finding mental peace while your body screams in pain or your heart is breaking, is incredibly difficult.
It requires years of intentional practice. And the reality of being human is that sometimes, no matter how much you practice mindfulness, the pain is simply too overwhelming.
The pressure builds too high, and you lose it. You completely, spectacularly break down.
Which brings us to the most visceral, unapologetically messy, and deeply comforting section of this entire deep dive.
Section 5. The absolute permission to break down and swear at God. We are looking at a deeply personal essay written by Michael Leach, one of the editors of this very book.
Leach's essay is a testament to the raw, unpolished, humiliating reality of long-term caregiving. He is the full-time caregiver for his wife, Vicky, who is suffering from the devastating progression of Alzheimer's disease.
And he makes a very intentional choice not to sugarcoat a single moment of what that life looks like.
He shares a story about a particularly chaotic, awful day. Vicky has a bathroom accident in the house. And it is not a small one.
There's poop everywhere. On her clothes, her skin smeared on the floor, and because she's walking around, it's spreading into other rooms like, as he darkly jokes, vandals.
Leach is desperately trying to clean her up, but because of the dementia, Vicky is deeply confused.
She doesn't understand what's happening, so she is actively resisting his help, fighting him as he tries to undress her.
And in that moment, Leach snaps. The facade of the patient, zen-like caregiver completely shatters.
He loses his temper entirely and yells at his sick, confused wife. He shouts, "What's the matter with you? I'm trying to help you."
And as the mess continues spreading, he screams at her, "You're killing me."
It is so painfully, embarrassingly human. And almost instantly, the adrenaline fades, and he feels the crushing weight of guilt.
He knows she has a brain disease. He knows she isn't doing it on purpose. He knows she doesn't deserve his anger.
He wipes his soiled hands on his pants, wraps his arms around her, hugs her tightly, and repeatedly apologizes.
He manages to clean them both up in the bathtub, gets her dressed in clean pajamas, and sits her safely in front of the television to watch an episode of Ellen.
But while Vicky is physically settled, the emotional storm inside Leach is still raging. He escapes to their bedroom, closes the door, and tries to regain his composure.
He attempts to use Andrew Weil deep breathing exercises, techniques specifically designed to lower the heart rate and restore calm, in through the nose, out through the mouth.
Desperately trying to get back to that peaceful state of acceptance we were just discussing with Kisagutami.
But the breathing exercises fail completely. On the second exhale, the dam simply breaks. He looks up at the ceiling and he screams at God.
The text prints it plainly. He screams, "God, you're an asshole. You're an asshole. You know that."
He writes that he literally growled fiercely at the ceiling like a wounded animal.
What makes this essay so crucial to the overall message of the book is how the text frames this moment. It actively normalizes this explosive reaction.
Leach isn't presented as a bad Christian or a failed spiritual practitioner or a weak man for swearing at the creator of the universe.
The text gently reminds the reader that Job, the ultimate biblical symbol of suffering, cursed the day he was born and furiously demanded answers from God.
Jesus himself, while dying in agony on the cross, cried out in despair, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The point is, we all break down.
The pressure of living in a dualistic world guarantees it.
Leach also demonstrates profound self-awareness as he analyzes his own scream. He recognizes in hindsight that calling God an obscene name wasn't actually a theological statement.
It was a massive psychological projection of his own intense, immediate guilt for yelling at his vulnerable wife.
It was a defense mechanism against his profound disappointment, his exhaustion, and the terrifying realization that his wife's mind was slipping away and he was powerless to stop it.
He was drowning in the reality of the Alzheimer's, and the most honest prayer he could possibly muster in that moment was a primal scream of rage.
And the text argues that such raw honesty is actually a profound form of grace. To support this idea that we shouldn't run from our darkest moments, the editors weave in short, powerful quotes they call sparks.
For example, they quote Pema Chodron, the renowned American Tibetan Buddhist. She advises, "Let difficulty transform you." And it will. In my experience, we just need help in learning how not to run away.
That phrase, not running away, is the crux of it. Even when running away just means slapping a fake serene smile on your face and pretending you are fine when you are falling apart.
The text brings in Ram Dass, the influential spiritual teacher, who refers to severe suffering as grace and a gift given in order to awaken you.
And Dorothy Soll, the brilliant German political theologian, states that our whole human life consists of despairing of an answer and yet continuously seeking an answer.
We really need to look closely at the pervasive myth in our modern wellness culture. There is this toxic idea that true spirituality means maintaining a serene, unbothered facade at all times.
That if you are truly enlightened, you float inches above the muck and grime of human existence, untouched by anger or despair.
But Leach's story violently shatters that myth. It suggests that sometimes true, gritty spirituality looks like being covered in feces, exhausted down to your very marrow, and screaming your lungs out at the universe.
Because it is honest. If you are deeply connected to the reality of your suffering, if you are truly in the trenches with it, you aren't hiding behind a toxic positivity filter. You are engaged in the fight.
I genuinely believe that accepting our ugly, impatient, screaming moments is what actually makes us better humans, and specifically better caregivers.
Think about Leach. If he demanded spiritual perfection of himself, if he believed that yelling at Vicky meant he was a failure, the guilt of that moment might have completely destroyed him.
It might have paralyzed him. But by accepting his own brokenness, By allowing himself to scream his frustration at the ceiling, he released the pressure valve.
He was able to walk back downstairs, sit next to his wife, and continue the grueling work of loving her.
That is the exact transformation Ram Dass and Pema Chodron are pointing toward. The intense fire of suffering burns away our arrogant illusions of control and our exhausting demands for perfection.
When the fire dies down, what is left is the raw, unadorned capacity to love and be loved in our most vulnerable, broken states.
We have covered an immense, heavy, and deeply profound amount of ground today. Let's pull all these threads together to solidify the core takeaways from this journey into the way of suffering.
First and foremost, we have to acknowledge and accept that we cannot escape the dualistic nature of the world.
Pain and pleasure are a non-negotiable package deal. Trying to numb the pain with external fixes, whether it's the ice cream, the pursuit of wealth, or constant distraction, is a temporary illusion that ultimately fails.
Second, we learn that demanding to know exactly why we suffer is a futile exercise that leads to madness. And offering glib, neatly packaged answers to the problem of evil only inflicts deeper psychological wounds on those who are hurting.
We have to learn how to sit quietly in the terrifying mystery alongside the suffering.
Third, we discovered that our true, lasting power lies not in magically erasing the physical pain, but in fundamentally changing our psychological relationship to it.
Just like Kisa Gotami dropping the mustard seed, we have to learn to drop the exhausting emotional baggage of wishing reality was different than it is.
And finally, we learn that giving ourselves full permission to break down, to lose our temper, to swear at the heavens is a necessary part of the process.
It is the honest friction that eventually polishes our souls and nurtures deep universal empathy for others.
It is an incredibly challenging path to walk, but it delivers precisely what the title of the book suggests: an enlightened life, forged in the fires of exactly the things we spend our entire lives frantically trying to avoid.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want you to think about a current struggle in your own life right now.
It could be the thing you immediately thought of when we first started this conversation, or maybe something new has surfaced.
Think about that struggle and ask yourself honestly, are you exhausting your daily energy fighting the reality that it exists? Are you violently demanding that the universe rewind the clock and undo the past?
Or are you actively looking for the crack where the light gets in?
Are you waiting paralyzed for a magic wand to fix it? Or are you cautiously allowing the crucible of this painful experience to expand your capacity for compassion?
I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day.
It is a concept heavily implied by everything we've read today. If suffering is indeed universal, exactly as Kisa Gotami discovered when she found tragedy behind every door in her village, then perhaps our pain isn't the barrier we always assume it is.
We usually treat our pain as a high wall. We think it isolates us, that it separates us from all the normal, happy, untroubled people walking around us.
But what if it's the exact opposite?
What if our pain is actually the connective tissue?
What if it is the very root network that links us fundamentally to the rest of humanity? Without a shared, intimate understanding of what it feels like to be broken, we wouldn't be capable of true empathy.
We wouldn't be capable of offering the unconditional love that the text describes as the true nature of the divine.
Maybe, just maybe, the wound itself is the exact place where we finally meet each other.
That is a profoundly beautiful lens through which to view our most difficult days.
It changes everything. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly moving exploration of the source material. We hope it gave you some tangible light for whatever dark spaces you might be navigating right now. Keep looking for the cracks and keep letting the light in.